This summer was supposed to be like any other, a brief escape to the lakeside cabin my family had been visiting for years. But as the days slipped by, something felt off, almost as if the season itself was reluctant to end. The final week of August brought an unusual stillness to the air, the kind that presses down on your skin and makes every shadow seem a little darker than it should be. I arrived at the cabin on a late afternoon, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges. The lake stretched before me, calm and serene, reflecting the fading light like a mirror. It was familiar and comforting, the kind of place where time slows and worries melt away. Yet, as the sun dipped lower behind the trees, I noticed a strange quietness. The usual chorus of birds and insects was muted, almost as if the woods were holding their breath. That night, as I settled in by the window, a faint whisper drifted through the stillness. At first, I thought it was the wind rustling through the leaves. But the sound was too distinct, soft murmurs that seemed to carry words just beyond comprehension. I strained my ears, trying to catch the echoes, but they slipped away like smoke. Moments later, the faintest footsteps brushed against the gravel outside the cabin, light and hesitant, as if someone, or something, was pacing just beyond the tree line. I told myself it was probably just an animal, a raccoon or a fox wandering near the cabin in search of food. But the footsteps had a rhythm, deliberate and uneven, not quite matching any creature I knew. Still, I pushed the feeling of unease aside, attributing it to an overactive imagination fueled by the solitude of the lake at dusk. Over the next couple of evenings, the sounds grew louder and more frequent. Whispered voices seemed to circle the cabin, sometimes so close I felt they could slip through the cracks in the wooden walls. Once, as I sat reading by the fireplace, I heard a sudden burst of chilling laughter, high-pitched and hollow, like children playing just beyond the edge of hearing. I froze, the book slipping from my hands as the laughter faded into an eerie silence. The nights brought strange new noises as well. Scratching sounds scraped against the outside of the windows, slow and deliberate, as if nails or claws were tracing invisible patterns across the glass. I rushed to the window, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. No movement, no shadows, just the swaying branches of the old oak trees standing sentinel around the cabin. I tried to dismiss the events as tricks of the mind, a product of too much time alone and the fading light of summer. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger with every passing night. I found myself glancing nervously over my shoulder, reluctant to step outside after dark. The peaceful retreat I had anticipated was unraveling into something far more unsettling. One evening, unable to bear the silence, I decided to venture out into the fading light, to see if I could discover the source of the whispers and footsteps. The air was thick with humidity, and the forest seemed to close in around me as I walked down the narrow path leading from the cabin to the edge of the lake. The trees towered overhead, their leaves rustling softly in a breeze I couldn't feel on my skin. As I moved deeper into the woods, the whispers returned, faint and indistinct, weaving through the branches like a secret song. I paused, trying to focus on the direction they came from, but the voices shifted and danced, impossible to pin down. Then, a sudden crack from a nearby bush startled me, and I spun around, heart racing. There was nothing there, only the dark shapes of trees and undergrowth. I told myself to calm down and keep moving, but the forest seemed to grow thicker, the shadows deeper. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a dim twilight that made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper, hoping to draw out whoever, or whatever, was making the noises. But my words were swallowed by the dark. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I heard it again. The laughter, closer this time, echoing through the trees like a ghostly chorus. It was followed by a scraping sound, softer but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the lake. I moved cautiously toward the shoreline, the underbrush crunching beneath my feet. The water was still and black under the moonlight, the surface broken only by the faint ripple of a breeze. I scanned the shore but saw nothing unusual, no footprints, no movement. Yet the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, prickling my skin and tightening my chest. I stepped back, my eyes catching a glimpse of something near the water's edge, a small, half-buried object glinting faintly in the moonlight. Curiosity pushed me forward. I knelt down and brushed away the dirt and fallen leaves. It was an old, weathered locket, tarnished with age and worn smooth from the elements. I opened it carefully and found a faded photograph inside, a black and white image of a young girl, her face solemn and eyes wide with an unspoken sadness. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't recognize the girl, and yet there was something hauntingly familiar about the image, as if it belonged to a story long forgotten but still lingering on the edges of this place. I slipped the locket into my pocket, feeling its weight as a silent reminder of the mystery that had settled over this final week of summer. As I stood up, the whispers rose again, swirling around me like a cold breeze. I hurried back toward the cabin, the sounds chasing me through the trees until I was safely inside, the door locked tight behind me. That night, lying awake in the dark, I wondered what secrets the lake and the forest were hiding, and whether they would let me leave before the summer ended. The next morning, the weight of the locket in my pocket was a constant reminder that the night's whispers and laughter were far from imaginary. As dawn broke over the lake, I decided I couldn't just sit inside the cabin, haunted by shadows and half-heard voices. If I was going to find answers, I needed to explore the woods more thoroughly, to see if there was anything tangible, anything that could explain the strange events that had unsettled me so deeply. I stepped out just as the first light filtered through the trees, the forest no longer ominous but alive with the gentle sounds of morning. Birds chirped tentatively, and the breeze stirred the undergrowth, carrying with it the fresh scent of pine and earth. I headed toward the area where I had found the locket, hoping to find more clues. The path was narrow and winding, overgrown in places with brambles and creeping vines. I pushed aside branches and scanned the ground carefully. Soon, I noticed strange marks on the trees, symbols carved deep into the bark, their edges weathered but unmistakable. They looked like a combination of circles and lines, arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic. I traced one with my finger, feeling the rough grooves beneath my skin. Nearby, half buried under moss and fallen leaves, something caught my eye. I crouched down and pulled aside the debris to reveal a small collection of objects. A cracked porcelain doll's head, a rusted pocket watch frozen at midnight, and a bundle of dried flowers tied with a faded ribbon. These remnants fell out of place, relics abandoned but not forgotten. Curiosity compelled me deeper into the woods. As I moved through the trees, the symbols repeated themselves on more trunks, each one different but somehow connected. The air grew cooler, and a shadow seemed to flicker at the edge of my vision. I stopped and looked around, but there was nothing there, only the quiet forest stretching out in every direction. At the base of an ancient oak, I noticed something unusual, a flat stone almost entirely covered by dirt and moss. I cleared it away to reveal a weathered leather-bound book, its cover cracked and stained with age. Carefully, I opened it, the pages brittle but still legible. The handwriting inside was cramped and uneven, as if written in haste. The diary chronicled a summer decades ago, telling a story of a small community by the lake and a tragedy that had never been fully explained. It spoke of a missing child named Elsie, who had vanished one warm August evening much like this one. The entries described the frantic search, the whispered rumors of strange lights in the woods, and the growing fear that something supernatural was involved. As I read, the atmosphere around me shifted. The forest seemed to close in tighter, the light dimming despite the clear morning sky. I glanced up and caught sight of movement, dark shapes flitting between the trees, just beyond the edge of my vision. I blinked, and they were gone, leaving only the rustle of leaves in their wake. Feeling a mix of dread and determination, I pocketed the diary and hurried back toward the cabin. I needed to share what I had found, to see if anyone else knew the story of Elsie or the mysterious symbols scattered through the woods. But when I mentioned it to the locals in the nearby town, their reactions were muted, almost dismissive. A few shrugged it off as old folklore, the kind of ghost stories people tell to make a place seem more interesting. One elderly man, sitting outside a weathered general store, offered a different perspective. He leaned in close and whispered about how the lake had always been a place of secrets, where things happened that no one could explain. He spoke of families who left suddenly, of strange disappearances that never made the newspapers. But when I asked for details, his eyes hardened, and he changed the subject quickly. The more I pressed, the more isolated I felt. The local authorities showed little interest in reopening old wounds, and the townspeople seemed wary of anyone stirring up memories best left buried. Alone with my thoughts, I returned to the cabin, the diary's pages heavy in my backpack. That evening, I ventured out once more, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever haunted the woods. The sun had set, and the twilight deepened into darkness, the lake's surface reflecting the pale moonlight. As I walked the shoreline, the whispers returned, faint but insistent, weaving through the trees like a mournful song. Suddenly, from the shadows, I spotted movement, figures standing just beyond the tree-line. They were indistinct, their forms blurred and shifting, like smoke caught in a breeze. I froze, heart pounding, as they seemed to watch me silently. The air grew colder, and the oppressive feeling of being watched intensified. I called out softly, my voice trembling, but the figures did not respond. Instead, they melted back into the darkness, disappearing as if they had never been there. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Returning to the cabin, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being drawn deeper into something I didn't fully understand. The diary story of Elsie, the strange symbols, the shadowy figures, they all felt connected, threads in a pattern I was only beginning to see. Determined to uncover the truth, I made a decision to keep searching, even if it meant facing the unknown. Whatever lingered in these woods was no longer content to remain hidden in whispers and shadows. It was watching, waiting, and perhaps wanting to be found. That night, the cabin felt suffocating, the darkness pressing in like a living thing. I had barely closed my eyes when I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, moving closer with an unsettling certainty. My breath caught in my throat as I peered through the window, heart hammering in my chest. A figure, cloaked in shadow, stood near the edge of the lake, unmoving, watching. The moonlight caught just enough of their form to make out a hood pulled low, concealing their face. I blinked, and they were gone. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light or an animal's silhouette, but the unease settled deep in my bones. The following days only intensified the feeling that I was being watched, stalked by something just beyond the edge of perception. Every time I left the cabin, I caught glimpses of movement, figures disappearing into the trees, eyes reflecting from the darkness. One evening, as I packed my things to leave, I noticed something strange on my car. Scratches marred the paint along the driver's side door, jagged and fresh, as if someone, or something, had raked their nails across it. Next to the scratches, scrawled in the dust with a shaky hand, were words that chilled me. "You can't leave." Panic set in, knotting my stomach. I checked the area around the car, but found no footprints or signs of who might have done it. The remote location and dense woods made it nearly impossible for anyone to approach unnoticed, and yet, the message was clear. I called the local police, desperate for help or at least some reassurance. When I explained the situation, the haunting figures, the strange symbols, the threats left on my car, they listened politely, but with skepticism. The officer on the line suggested it might be vandals or pranksters, nothing more sinister. "Probably just teenagers messing around," he said, his tone dismissive. "There's nothing unusual about this area." But I knew better. The fear that had been growing inside me was real, and the evidence was right there on my car. The next night, I resolved to stay awake, to confront whatever was haunting me. I sat by the window, flashlight in hand, eyes fixed on the dark woods beyond the porch. Hours passed with only the sounds of crickets and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. Then, just as I was beginning to doubt my own fears, I saw it. A cloaked figure emerged from the shadows, moving silently toward the cabin. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might give me away. I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help, but the figure stopped suddenly, as if sensing my gaze. Slowly, they turned, and for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of a pale face beneath the hood, eyes black and empty like deep wells of darkness. Before I could react, the figure vanished into the night, leaving only a cold chill in the air. I wanted to leave immediately to escape this nightmare, but as I approached my car the next morning, I found the road blocked. Large fallen branches and rocks had been placed across it, preventing any easy exit. On the windshield, more words appeared, scratched into the glass with a sharp object. "Stay." I tried to call the police again, but my phone showed no signal. It was as if the area itself was cutting me off from the outside world, trapping me in a growing nightmare. The isolation pressed down, suffocating and absolute. Desperate, I searched the cabin for any way out, any alternative path that might lead back to civilization. The woods surrounded me on all sides, dense and unyielding. Every time I stepped outside, the whispers returned, sometimes faint, sometimes deafening, echoing through the trees. I returned to the cabin and found strange messages carved into the wooden walls, scratches forming symbols I had seen before on the trees, but now arranged into words: "Don't trust the light," and "They watch." I was losing track of time, my nerves fraying under the weight of constant fear. Sleep became impossible as the nights grew longer and the shadows deeper. I felt eyes on me everywhere, unseen watchers lurking just beyond the glow of my flashlight. In a final attempt to break free, I reached out to a local historian I had met earlier, someone who had shown a faint interest in the lake's mysteries. I recounted everything: the diary, the symbols, the figures, the threats. He listened carefully, his face grave. "There's more to this place than you realize," he said quietly. "People have disappeared here before, and the stories never end well. Whatever you're dealing with, it's tied to the history of the lake and the old rituals they used to perform in these woods." I pressed him for help, but he warned me to be cautious. The deeper you dig, the more dangerous it becomes. Sometimes, the past doesn't want to stay buried. That night, as I sat alone in the cabin, the temperature dropped suddenly, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls. Shadows gathered in the corners of the room, twisting and shifting until they coalesced into a single, dark shape. I backed away, heart racing, but the figure advanced, silent and relentless. I raised my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, but it only seemed to anger the entity, which recoiled and then vanished with a final, echoing laugh that chilled me to my core. I realized then that leaving wouldn't be as simple as driving away. Something was determined to keep me here, trapped in this place where summer's warmth twisted into something cold and malevolent. A few towns over, along the ragged coastline where the waves crashed relentlessly against jagged rocks, a different story was unfolding, one that somehow felt connected to the eerie happenings by the lake. I first heard about it from a friend who lived in the nearby beach town, a place known for its quiet charm and close-knit community. The summer there had been marked not by laughter and sunbathers, but by fear and unanswered questions. It began during a bonfire party on the beach, a gathering of teenagers who had come together to celebrate the end of the season. The night was warm, the sky clear, and the flames from the fire flickered against the dark backdrop of the ocean. But as the evening wore on, something changed. The music faded, conversations grew hushed, and one by one, several of the teens vanished without a trace. The next morning, the beach was scattered with remnants of the party: charred wood, broken bottles, and strange symbols drawn in the sand. Cryptic notes, hastily scrawled on scraps of paper, were found buried beneath driftwood and debris. They spoke of warnings and curses, of dark forces awakened and ancient pacts broken. The community was shaken. Parents kept their children indoors. Whispers of a local curse spread like wildfire, and old stories once dismissed as folklore resurfaced with renewed urgency. The beach, once a place of joy and freedom, had become a site of dread and suspicion. My friend recounted how the townspeople had tried to make sense of the disappearances, organizing search parties and sharing stories around kitchen tables. But the more they dug, the more elusive the truth became. Authorities dismissed the events as typical teenage mischief gone wrong, but those who lived there knew better. Intrigued, I spoke with a local investigator who had taken a personal interest in the case. She described the scene at the beach in detail: the burnt remnants of the bonfire, the cryptic notes, and the eerie symbols that matched ones I had seen carved into trees near the lake. She believed there was a connection, a dark thread weaving through both places. According to her, the symbols were tied to an old ritual, one that had been performed by a secretive group long ago. The ritual was meant to protect the land and its people, but something had gone terribly wrong. Instead of safeguarding the community, it seemed to have unleashed a malevolent force that now sought to claim its toll. She spoke of how the ritual was linked to the changing of the seasons, particularly the end of summer, a time when the veil between worlds grew thin and the past could reach out to the present. The disappearances and strange occurrences were not random, but part of a larger, sinister pattern. The investigator and I exchanged information, piecing together clues from both the lakeside woods and the coastal town. It became clear that the two places, though miles apart, were connected by more than just folklore. The same dark energy seemed to pulse through them, a shadow stretching across the landscape as summer waned. As I listened to her account, I felt a growing sense of urgency. The stories from the beach mirrored my own experiences, the symbols, the disappearances, the unseen watchers. It was as if the entire region was caught in the grip of something ancient and unforgiving, something that thrived on fear and silence. The investigator warned me to be cautious, to keep my findings to myself. The community was fragile, and stirring up old secrets could provoke consequences no one was prepared to face. She shared her own encounters with the inexplicable, strange lights over the water, unexplainable sounds in the night, and shadowy figures glimpsed just beyond the edge of vision. Her words echoed my own fears and confirmed that I was not imagining things. There was a force at work here, one that defied logic and reason, tied to the land and its history in ways that few understood. That night, back at the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was part of something much larger than myself. The lake, the woods, the beach, all connected by a dark thread woven through time and space. The end of summer was no longer just a season changing. It was a threshold, a doorway to something unknown and dangerous. I sat by the window, the diary and notes spread before me, trying to make sense of the puzzle. The whispered warnings, the carved symbols, the vanished teenagers, they all pointed toward a ritual, an ancient ceremony meant to bind or banish whatever haunted this land. As the wind picked up outside, carrying the scent of salt and pine, I realized that the answers I sought might lie not just in the woods beside the lake, but also in the stories of the coastal town. The darkness was spreading, and the transition from summer to fall was more than just a change in weather. It was the awakening of something that had been waiting, watching, and now, it seemed, it was ready to act. I knew I had to keep digging, to follow the clues wherever they led, even if it meant confronting the shadows that had been lingering at the edges of my world. The summer's end was no longer a time for rest or reflection. It was a call to face the unknown, to unravel the secrets buried beneath the surface before it was too late. The investigation into the strange happenings stretched far beyond what I originally imagined. With the diary, the symbols, and the unsettling accounts from the coastal town all in hand, I found myself drawn to a place that had remained hidden for years, a cavern tucked away beneath a ridge near the lake, whispered about in local legends but dismissed by most as mere myth. The entrance was concealed by dense brush and fallen trees, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. When I finally stumbled upon it, a chill ran down my spine. The air around the opening was cold and still, carrying a faint scent of damp earth and something metallic, like rust or blood. I hesitated, but my need for answers pushed me forward. Inside, the cavern was vast, walls slick with moisture and darkness swallowing the edges of my flashlight's beam. As I ventured deeper, I noticed markings on the stone, those same symbols from the trees and the burnt beach, etched crudely but unmistakably. They surrounded a central altar-like structure, stained dark with age and something far less natural. It was clear that this place had been used for rituals, ceremonies meant to bind or awaken something ancient. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and I felt the weight of countless eyes watching from the shadows. Despite my search, there were no signs of recent activity, no fresh footprints, no discarded items, only the lingering presence of something that hadn't moved on. I took photographs and notes, hoping to bring evidence to those who might help. But the more I uncovered, the more questions remained unanswered. What was this force tied to the lake and the coast? What had the rituals tried to seal away, or perhaps unleash? Weeks later, I found myself on a solitary hiking trip in a remote mountain range, attempting to clear my mind and process everything that had happened. The solitude was both a comfort and a challenge, a chance to reflect without distraction. On the third night, as I made my way back to camp after dark, I saw a strange light flickering between the trees ahead. Curious, I called out, but the light abruptly vanished. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Suddenly, A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, slender form cloaked in darkness, its face obscured. There was something deeply unnatural about it, a presence that seemed to absorb the very light around it. Before I could react, the figure moved quickly, attacking with an otherworldly speed. I barely managed to defend myself with the small knife I carried, the struggle leaving me shaken and breathless. When the figure finally retreated into the night, I was left with a lingering sense of dread, realizing how close I had come to a fate I could barely comprehend. That encounter changed everything. It forced me to rethink the nature of the forces I'd been chasing. Entities not bound by our understanding of reality, capable of crossing boundaries between worlds. The summer's inn was no longer just a time of seasonal change, but a gateway for these dark presences to step through. Since then, I've avoided traveling alone, especially in the fading light. The memories of that night, the scream that echoed as the figure disappeared, haunt me still. The stories from the lake, the coastal town, and my own terrifying encounter all weave together into a tapestry of fear and mystery. The transition from summer's warmth to the cold unknown is more than just a change in weather. It's a reminder of how thin the veil between our world and something darker can be. And as the seasons turn, I'm left wondering what else awaits in the shadows, just beyond the edge of sight.